My idea here is to kind of work with all of you, just take a step back and say that, in context of what's available out there, how are companies thinking, what are they struggling with, in leadership development. And a lot of it comes from our experience of working with clients in terms of, what are they saying as challenges, what are they saying as priorities, what's working for them, what's not working for them. And the context to this is that, we did a survey about 6-7 months back with about 550 odd companies in India. And, and one of the questions was, how optimistic are you about, the next year, the year after that? And about 60% of Indian CEOs and business leaders said that they do believe that next 2-3 years from a performance perspective are going to be better than what, the previous few years have been. And that also means that businesses will grow. Many would grow at 10, 15, 20%, and that means that they will be double, triple of the sizes of what they are today in 2, 3, 4 years from now. And that's irrespective of any industry. You look at hospitality, you look at steel, you look at automobile. Across industries, there is a sentiment that over a period of time, India is going to grow and grow fast in terms of what's happening. So then you go back and look at what's really happening in businesses across. Now these are some startups, and you would say what context does it have in terms of what's really happening out there in the market. But all of these companies are for their consumers in the ecosystem that they work, disrupting industries. So not only are they disrupting for themselves, but they're also disrupting for the big boys in terms of where they are. So the Ubers and Olas are disrupting for big cap companies. The Oyos and the Airbnbs of the world are disrupting hospitality as a sector. There are companies disrupting food and restaurants, and their change or the stuff that they're going through is impacting how the big companies work. And the big companies are beginning to see that the challenges that these guys are throwing up, how do you respond to some of these stuff? And the leaders in that sense in many of these organizations, whether it's small companies or big companies, increasingly have to face issues around the speed at which they respond to market with, the agility in terms of that they need to display, and the innovation in terms of business models that they need to have. Many companies talk of disruption around the corner. I would say disruption is right out there. If you haven't seen it, then it's unlikely that you would be able to respond to it appropriately in years to come. So from a business perspective, models are changing, your supply chains are changing, your ecosystems are changing. And then you go back and look at companies from the inside. Again, your talent's changing, your managers and leaders are younger than ever before. There are multiple generations at work, 4 or 5 generations at workplace. So how do you deal with them? The employees that we're getting at work are spending time working very differently as compared to what they have in the past. They've grown up with Facebooks and Twitters and stuff of the world. They've seen greater amount of information and transparency, and that's exactly what they're demanding from their employers. So in that context, the expectation that organizations have from their leaders about how do you manage this generation at workplace and how do you drive them and enthuse them to be productive, to be performing well is also changing. So in that sense, if you go back to the previous one where it was about speed, agility, innovation, from a people perspective, it's about what's the kind of experience that you provide them, what's the kind of systems that you have. People want more and more information, so how would you be more transparent about some of these things? Millennials are increasingly asking for places that they work with, what's the larger purpose of it? So how do you define that stuff? So it's not just about P&Ls and making profits and growing 10, 15, 20%, but what's the larger purpose in the organization? So in that sense, the pressure that leaders have today is changing faster than ever before. In many ways, this is like, for those of you who follow Formula 1, car comes into a pit stop and in between 5 to 7, 8 seconds is out of the pit stop. If you go back and look at what was happening in Formula 1, 15, 20 years back, you would have cars come in and spend about a minute there. So in that context, there are many organizations that are still working with those same old tools for leaders and businesses that actually need very, very different orientation to succeed in current times. And we do hear this from L&D professionals. That CEOs do, a lot of CEOs and business leaders do lip service. We hear this from CEOs that our learning teams are just not equipped to understand what business realities are and how do you respond to those. So the challenge is at both ends in terms of how do you work together and kind of solve some of these issues and challenges. Again, this is a survey that we did some time back, and we looked at multitude of issues across businesses in terms of what those aspects that will come in the way of organizations succeeding in years to come. So what's the magnitude of the challenge and what's the likelihood of the challenge kind of coming and hitting you? This was filled up by HR heads, by chief digital officers, by CIOs, by CFOs, by risk heads. And when we go back and look at the data, talent issues or people issues were amongst the highest that companies thought, both from a magnitude as well as a likelihood, irrespective. So rising talent costs. So, in India is a country where salaries have been increasing at double digits over last, literally 10 years. CXO salaries in India are comparable to salaries from a fixed cost perspective of what's happening out there in Western markets or more evolved markets in Asia. How companies need to respond to future challenges. There's an issue about skills shortage. Do you have enough of sufficient skills to be able to grow, first hire and then actually make them grow? As more and more businesses come up, especially new businesses that are disrupting workplaces, how do I retain employees? There are other newer places that have a value proposition. We haven't been able to architect or put a value proposition together. So how do I retain and keep critical employees in the organization? And in the end, in terms of, I just don't have enough number of managers that I can grow into leaders. I just don't have enough leaders who understand what my business needs to deliver in future. And again, these are not issues that are just being faced by startups or by high-tech companies. It's being faced by giants. We're working with companies in automobile and steel, who for many, many years worked in this whole aspect of working in an environment where government was protecting them, that, how do you control imports, how do you kind of work through the ecosystem to ensure that, there's enough that you can do and there's enough of demand. And suddenly with all of this consumer behavior changing and global markets opening up, stuff around anti-dumping, they suddenly don't have leaders who can actually make the business grow 2x, 3x in an environment that's very, very different. So it's a challenge that's across the industry in terms of what's really happening. And in this, again, when we go back, and this is a survey out of a different consulting firm had actually done this, when we go back and speak to leaders and say, what do they think in terms of where they are and how, do they have enough to kind of succeed in years to come? So only about 34% of leaders, agree that they are actually prepared from their own capability perspective to lead diverse workforces. Only about 44% of executives believe that, their companies are equipping them to succeed over time to come. So again, it's not just that boards and CEOs think that there are challenges. I think managers and leaders agree themselves that there are issues and that they need to kind of work with, grapple with, and build their own capabilities. Now, having said this, it's not that the story is bad all over the place. We've been running a survey called the Top Companies for Leaders for many years across the globe, including India. Every couple of years we run this global survey, and there's enough of some outstanding work happening in the country here. So in this global list that we release of top 20, top 25 top companies for leaders, firms like ICICI, firms like Tata Consultancy Services, firms like Wipro, firms like Mahindra & Mahindra seem to be doing outstanding work, which actually helps, literally kind of gets them to measure up to what's really happening with best-in-class companies across the world. So in this list where there are companies like 3M's and McKinsey's and General Mills and G's of the world, which are kind of companies that have not only outstanding programs and practices, but also from an output perspective are able to deliver to their businesses about what they need from a leadership perspective. Many of these Indian firms are doing this stuff. So we thought what we would possibly share with you here are a bunch of things from a philosophy perspective that these companies look at. So if you go back and look at programs, I think everyone's doing the same stuff. All companies by and large have some kind of a high potential program. All companies do 360, all companies have competencies, all companies do assessment centers, all companies do talent reviews. But why do these companies kind of go out and deliver on these programs in a manner that's significantly superior to what the rest of the ecosystem actually does? So what are some of those big issues that they look at? And I'll just put them on screen. So essentially, it summarizes down to 5 things. The first is, how do they align their programs, leadership programs and people programs with strategy? So it's not about buying a technology that helps you kind of service that need. It's not about just doing stuff from a lip service perspective, but truly kind of people programs at the center and saying, what does my business need out of this stuff? So whether it's about diversity, whether it's about building your hypos, whether it's about campus hiring. So there are examples of companies, good times or bad times, would actually land up in a campus and still hire, because they genuinely believe that pipeline needs to come in. They need to continuously invest in that kind of talent group to make it grow and build leaders and CEOs in the future. There are companies that invest in diversity, not from a brand perspective, but from a point of view that there is, for them to be able to build enough of pipeline and have quality leaders in place, they need enough women in workforce and then be able to provide an ecosystem for them to be able to succeed. So these are not brand programs, but very, very strongly aligned to what businesses need to do. The other stuff is about interconnectedness. So how much do you align your programs with what businesses really need. So these are not standalone programs, but truly going out to kind of businesses, working with them, engaging with them to understand what their needs, not only for today are, but in years to come, and then how do you kind of go back and build some of those needs. Again, future proof. So not only do you build programs for today, but how do you ensure that in years to come, some of the systems and processes that you build will actually kind of go through and be able to survive stuff that needs to do. The last stuff is about just building personal stuff around it. So it's not just about having general programs. What works for everyone may not be something that works for the organization. So how do you build unique experiences one by one for individuals, for leaders, and then make it work? And the last stuff is about be able to sustain and measure. So measure the effectiveness of the programs as well as measure the effectiveness of how good your leaders are, be able to continuously give them feedback, be able to continuously drive in terms of how they really succeed. So that's what we broadly had. I could go into a little bit more detail in terms of from a Think perspective. Again, when we go back and look at some of these top companies for leaders, some of the names that I took, companies like ICICI, companies like Mahindra and Mahindra, companies like TCS, etc. How strongly do they align their people programs or leadership strategy with what the business really needs, and kind of then make it work back and ensure that there is everything that goes back and supports is outstanding. And when you go back and look at business performance, it supports in terms of growth, in terms of various other parameters, in terms of what's really happening. Again, the role that HR plays, truly kind of going out and enabling the process. So it's not just about going in the front and leading some of the stuff, but being a partner to this. So hearing out businesses in terms of what they want, succeeding leaders to participate in the program, helping CEOs kind of work with them to be able to deliver on and strategize in terms of what needs to happen. So truly playing a role that's supportive in that sense. And again, so 96% of top companies for leaders have leaders who partner for coaching and mentoring conversations in organizations. About 86% of top companies for leaders have BU leaders who kind of go back and work very actively with HR and with leadership programs that happen in the company. Again, companies use a variety of assessment tools and frameworks in terms of what they do. So it's about sustain and measure. So it's about measuring leader, about different kinds of action steps and things that they do, and then working with them to kind of give them feedback. So it's not just about doing 360s, but it's about doing a multitude of tools and programs that actually give them a 360-degree view of who they are, how they can succeed, and what makes them tick in an organization. Different kinds of stuff that works for them. And the last stuff is about building experiences one by one for individuals. So what works for your one leader necessarily may not work for the other leader. Their development needs are unique. There's enough out there in the market today to try and go and understand what people need and build programs that are customized for each leader group. So I'll come back and just end with this, that it's not about what you do, it's about how well do you some of those things. So it's for some reasons that it's said that execution is the comparative advantage in the end. And the best book literally written on strategy was Execution. So how well do you do what you do is what makes a difference in the end. So it's not just about running programs just for the sake of running them. It's about running these programs, continuously evaluating them, seeing what works, measuring them, tweaking them if it needs to be, and going back to the drawing board as often as it requires, and working very well in partnership with the business.